أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. We are still in the foreword of the book, in which the author is walking us through the history of the science of Usul, legal theory, the significance of the science and how it developed. So if you turn to page 31, at the bottom of the book, we see there is a heading called Works on Usul. In the beginning of this paragraph, the author talks about a very important point. When the science of Usul was in its formative period, in its early stages of development, it was a controversial science, meaning that not all Shia scholars agreed that you need the science the way we have it today. You just have fiqh, Islamic law, you take the hadiths, and you take legal rulings from them. You don't need a science of common elements, which is called usul or legal theory, for you to really apply it to fiqh and Islamic law. This science was a controversial science. And the primary reason why it was a controversial science was that if you look at the Sunni schools of thought, they developed usul earlier than the Shia school of thought. So some of these conservative Shia scholars, they came in and said, wait a minute, the Sunnis are the ones who developed usul legal theory. Why are we copying them? Why are we taking their science and applying it to our own jurisprudence and Islamic law? This was controversial in the beginning. Not all Shia scholars agreed that you needed this science, and you're just emulating these other schools of thought. Now in earlier courses, we did talk about some of the companions of Al-Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam, who had some minor works on usul, like Hisham ibn al-Hakam and his book on alfaz, on terms. But these were very minor efforts in which you had the companions of the imams or the scholars of the time who were examining these common elements that we call ilm al-usul, the science of usul. These were some very minor efforts. But if you look at the Sunni schools of thought in that period, they had comprehensive works on ilm al-usul, such as Al-Shafi'i. The first Sunni scholar to really write about usul was who? Al-Shafi'i. He has a comprehensive book on legal theory, on these common elements, these universal principles that you apply to fiqh. So some of these Shia scholars were saying, wait a minute, are we copying Al-Shafi'i? Why do we need the science? Now the author here is explaining to us, why did Shi'i usul come after Sunni usul? There's a reason for that. And the reason is very simple. Because the Sunnis had a gap when it came to their hadiths long before we Shias had a gap. Because the Sunnis consider the source of Sharia to be the hadith of who only? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, hadith ended. You can't have any new hadiths. So you have a gap now. So at the time of Shafi'i, now you came over a century after the Prophet and you no longer have any new hadiths to work with. So you need a science called usul to give you general, universal principles we call common elements to help you extract Islamic rulings. So we see that when it came to the Sunni schools of thought, there was a necessity for them to develop usul before the Shia. At the time of a Shafi'i, the companions of Al-Imam Al-Sadiq, Al-Imam Al-Baqer, Al-Imam Al-Kadhim and the other Imams, they did not really need usul. Why? Because you have the Imam there. Every day, you're getting new hadiths. If there is a case you don't know how to deal with, you can go to the Imam. If there are contradictory reports or hadiths, just go to the Imam and he'll resolve it for you. There was not that pressing need to create a science called usul to help you deal with all these issues. Because as we said in the earlier course, if you live at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, do you really need usul? Not really. You don't need usul. Just go to the Prophet and hear him. You're not, depending on any narrator for you to come and say, okay, which hadith do I accept, which I don't? What are the criteria for a reliable narrator? You need none of that because you just go to the Prophet and you hear him. Do you have to deal with conflicting hadiths? No, because you're hearing the Prophet directly and the Prophet doesn't contradict himself. So when you live in the presence of a ma'soom, of someone who's infallible, you don't need usul, really. Except sometimes, that's why we see some of the companions of the Imams, they did have some very minor works. But when it came to the Sunni schools of thought, they don't recognize the authority of the Imams. They say the hadith only from the Prophet, right? So now you have this gap. That's why Shafi'i and others, they were compelled to create the science of usul. Because they came over a century after the Prophet, and there was so much confusion with the hadiths, which are reliable, which are not, which were recorded, which are not. You have new cases that come up, which maybe the Prophet did not address. How do you deal with them? You need usul to give you the tools to deal with that. Whereas the Shia, they really didn't need that. For 250 years they had imams they could go to. A new case comes up, easy. Go to the Imam alayhi salam and ask him. Let me give you an example. Let's say cloning. Did the Prophet talk about cloning explicitly? No. Did any of the Imams talk about it explicitly? No. Why? It didn't exist at the time. People didn't even know what it was. Nobody would even ask the Imam such a question because you don't even know what it is, right? So, if I want to issue a fatwa regarding cloning, what do? I open the book of Kafi, I don't see any hadith about cloning. I open the Quran, I don't see any verse about cloning. What do? I need general principles that I borrow from usul that guide me how to issue a fatwa regarding a case which was not existent at the time of the Imams. You see why I need usul now? But let's say you had an Imam now that you could go to. Do you need usul? No. Just go to the Imam and ask him, Imam, is cloning halal or haram? What are the limits of cloning? It's that simple. So for 250 years, the Shia didn't really need usul because the Imam was present there. You did not really need that science of usul except some small elements here and there. So the author is telling us the reason why the Sunnis developed usul because they needed it before the Shia. Not that we came and decided to copy them. Not because we were necessarily influenced by them. Because some scholars of the past, the very conservative fundamentalist scholars, they would tell you, oh, you're being influenced by the Sunni schools of thought. You're taking usul from them because they developed usul, you're also developing usul. Is that the case? No. But the real reason is because we did not really have a need for usul. Whereas the Sunni schools of thought, they had a pressing need for usul. Because they stopped at the hadith of the Prophet and you had a gap. At that time we had imams and we could just refer to them. I don't really need usul. Is this point clear? Okay. So this is basically what the author talks about in the heading under works on usul. If you go to page 32, in that first paragraph, the third line, he says how usul started in the Sunni world. It is said that Sunni works on usul began to be written towards the end of the 2nd century AH. So about 2 centuries after the Prophet. Examples being books written on the subject by Ash-Shafi'i Al-Shafi'i was probably the first scholar amongst the Sunni schools of thought who wrote a book on usul, legal theory. What was the name of his book? It's called Ar-Risala. You can find it. It has survived until today and you can find it. So that's one. The second is who? And Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. Page 32. You don't have the book? The actual copy of the book? Okay, do you have until page 32 or no?
Yeah, I do.
So if you go to page 32, at the top, the third line, the third or fourth line. Does everyone follow with me in the book?
Yeah.
Okay, so page 32 in the top. And you have Muhammad ibn Hasan al-Shaybani. Who was Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani? Have you ever heard of him? He was the companion of Abu Hanifa. You've heard of the Hanafi school of thought? Who spread the Hanafi school of thought? Shaybani. Remember, Abu Hanifa, he had tough times and he was imprisoned by the authorities, even the governments of his time. There were some times where there was tension between him and the governments of his time, and he was imprisoned. During the time of Harun, yes. Al-Shaybani was his student and companion who spread his madhab. So if it weren't for Shaybani, you would have no Hanafi school of thought. It would have not have survived. Who is the one who made it survive? Shaybani. Yes, brother.
There's some kid claiming that the founders of the Sunni madhabs were Shia and Taqiyya.
That is a baseless claim. No. Those who founded the Sunni madhabs, Abu Hanifa is the one who founded the Hanafi school of thought, and he was no Shia and he was not in Taqiyya. So I don't see any basis for that.
What about
Imam Malik ibn Anas, he was not a Shia. Yes, in his book Musnad Ahmad, or Ahmad ibn Hanbal, for example, or Imam Malik, they were not Shia, but in their books, Al-Muwatta, for example, by Malik, they do mention hadiths about the virtues of Ahlul Bayt. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the Wahhabis, they're Hanbali. It's the most conservative fiqh school of thought. In his book Musnad, he has hundreds of narrations about the virtues of Ahlul Bayt. But that does not mean they were Shia. These were hadiths that had survived from the Prophet, and they documented it. And a lot of them were erased, by the way, but some of them made it through history. So no, they were not Shia. Yes, they did respect the Ahlul Bayt to a degree, and they did document some virtues of the Ahlul Bayt. So Al-Shaybani is another one who wrote a work on usul, and he's the one who propagated the madhab of Abu Hanifa. Now, you see that they both died in the same year. Al-Shafi'i passed away in 189, and Al-Shaybani also died in 189. So we're talking about the end of the 2nd century. So when you look at the Sunni development of usul, it started at the end of the 2nd century. But when you look at the Shia school of thought, we see that really there were no comprehensive efforts to develop usul until you get to Al-Ghaybat al-Kubra and Al-Sughra of who? Al-Imam al-Mahdi. Which century are we talking about? 4th century. We're now talking about the end of the 3rd century, in the 4th century, where now the Shia don't have direct access to the Imam of their time. Now they feel the need for usul. And Al-Imam al-Sadiq, Al-Imam al-Baqer, peace be upon them, we discussed before they would train their companions to learn aspects of usul, right? They would give them some principles, even though the Imam was present there. Why? To train them for the ghaibah. You see how the Imams trained their followers for the ghaibah? They prepared them. They prepared them in many ways, in terms of aqeedah, Islamic beliefs, politically, socially, and legally they trained them. So when Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam teaches Muhammad ibn Muslim, teaches Zurara, Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman, Hisham ibn al-Hakam, he teaches them these principles because he wants the Shia scholars to be self-sufficient so that if they're disconnected from their Imam, they have a way to approach Islamic law. And hence we see that the main reason why the Imams of Ahlul Bayt taught their companions usul, the common elements, these principles, was to prepare them for what? For the ghaibah of Imam al-Mahdi. You see the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how amazing it is? Because the Imam knew that soon the final Imam will be in ghaibah. You can no longer go to him and ask him specific questions. So let me teach you principles and tools that help you figure out Islamic law. And that's what they did. And this is truly amazing. It's miraculous how the Imams trained their followers for the ghaibah. Any questions about this point? Okay. So let's continue into the following paragraph. And basically what the author says is that the reason why the Sunni Usul came before the Shia Usul is because the Sunnis had an earlier gap, because they stopped at the hadith of the Prophet, whereas the Shias always had their Imam next to their side. So in the ghaibah, the occultation, they felt the need for Usul. This is basically what the author outlines over here. Then if you go to the final paragraph on page 32, the third line or the third sentence, the author says it was only then that their thinking, who's thinking? The Shia, in ghaybat al-sughra, in the lesser occultation, it was only then that their thinking on usul began to emerge, and that they started studying the common elements in the process of deduction when they wanted to deduce Islamic laws. Progress was accomplished in this field by a number of distinguished pioneers among the jurists. Who were the first scholars, Shia scholars, to start usul as a science? And they treated it as a science. Now remember, those early companions, while they had some common elements, they were not treating usul as a separate, independent, full-fledged science. Who are the scholars in the Shia school of thought who started treating usul as a separate science? Who were they? Two. He mentions two. Number one is such as Hassan ibn Ali ibn Abi Aqil. He's common known as Ibn Abi Aqil. He's known for that. And Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Junayd al-Iskafi. These were the two earliest scholars who what? Developed the science of usul in the 4th century after the Hijrah. So we're talking about the lesser ghaibah, the major ghaibah, after Al-Imam al-Mahdi transitioned from the minor ghaibah into the major ghaibah. That's where when we see Shia scholars now treating usul as a separate science. Yes?
Do you want us to know their names?
It's good to know how this science started so we can appreciate the effort that was put into it and how this evolved throughout history. So I don't expect you, to memorize exactly their names and, what year did they die in, but just have an idea such that if you're asked, okay, the science of usul, legal theory, when did it become a complete independent science? Just know that it was in the 4th century, and just know Ibn Abi Aqil or Ibn al-Junayd. Now Ibn Abi Aqil, he was a contemporary of who? Al-Kulayni. Now what's the difference between Ibn Abi Aqil and Kulayni? Kulayni was a muhaddith. His area of expertise was hadith. Collecting hadith, organizing hadith, and giving you the chain or the sanad. But does Kulayni have any works on usul? No, he doesn't. That's why Ibn Abi Aqil is considered to be the first Shia scholar who really delved into ijtihad. You've heard of ijtihad, jurisprudence, the process of extracting Islamic laws. Qazwini would just give you the hadith. He collects the hadith, he's meticulous in choosing the hadith, he gives it to you. But Ibn Abi Aqil, he developed a science. Let's take this a step further. How do we deal with all these hadiths? What are the common elements? What are the universal principles? This was done by who? Ibn Abi Aqil. So you could call him the first mujtahid. The first of the big mujtahids is Ibn Abi Aqil. The other one was Ibn al-Junayd. Ibn al-Junayd is one of the teachers of Al-Shaykh al-Mufid. Shaykh al-Mufid was one of the big scholars, you've all heard of him. Ibn al-Junayd was his teacher, the teacher of al-Mufid. He came after Ibn Abi Aqil. So first is Ibn Abi Aqil, then you have Ibn al-Junayd. Scholars in his era, they had a negative stance from Ibn al-Junayd. Why? They considered him to be opinionated, and that in the process of ijtihad, he would insert his opinion a lot. So that's why his contemporaries, let's be honest, they didn't really like him. It's later scholars who came centuries later who started to appreciate his work, who started to appreciate his works and his ijtihad and his depth. At that time, scholars like, look, just stick to the hadith, don't come up with all these principles and tools, and then you're inserting your opinion. So Ibn al-Junayd was considered to favor his ra'i, his own opinion.
So was he doing the right thing or?
It depends who you ask. If you ask an akhbari, he'll tell you he was doing the wrong thing. Akhbaris are those literalists, the conservatives who just deal with the texts. If you ask someone who's open, a usuli, a mujtahid, he tells you no. A lot of what he did, he may have erred in some areas, but a lot of what he did was good. He was actually expanding Islamic law.
Would we say that a lot of laws have been derived because of the works of Ibn Junayd?
Absolutely. They were instrumental in establishing the science, and many laws were derived as a result of this science. And remember, anytime you have something new in history, people resist it, right? Yeah. If you're expanding on, people don't like changes, right? Immediately they quickly could attack you. You're making changes, you're innovating in religion. And that would happen even among Shia scholars. Especially those who were conservative. They didn't like these changes because they were afraid if you open this door, then you get a lot of changes. So Ibn al-Junayd was amongst those scholars who was instrumental in bringing this change.
So maybe one of the reasons that they did not like it is because then it would open the doors for everybody to innovate things.
Yes, they had valid concerns that this could open the door for anybody to come and innovate things. And sometimes it would happen. There were some people who were not qualified. But in the end, we in the Shia school of thought, we keep the door of ijtihad open. And people just teach them and educate them to follow someone who's qualified. So this is what we have in that period. And then you have Al-Shaykh al-Mufid who came later, and he really developed the science of usul. He took it just to a new level. He solidified it. But before him, Ibn Abi Aqil and Ibn al-Junayd, they were instrumental. Another name that you have in usul is As-Sayyid al-Murtada or Al-Sharif al-Murtada. Who compiled Nahj al-Balagha? Sayyid Radhi. What's Sayyid Radhi's relationship with Sayyid Murtada? His brother. So the brother of the one who compiled Nahj al-Balagha is Sayyid al-Murtada. And he has a book called Al-Dhari'a. The author mentions this on page 33. He has a book called Al-Dhari'a. In Al-Dhari'a, he talks about usul. So after Ibn al-Junayd, you have Sayyid al-Murtada, Shaykh al-Mufid. They really solidified the science of usul. And then after that, who did you have? Al-Shaykh al-Tusi. Al-Shaykh al-Tusi took it even to a deeper level. These are the big names in usul and in Islamic law. Al-Shaykh al-Tusi, who was now in the 5th century, you see that he even developed the science of usul to greater depths, and he probably had the most, everlasting influence on usul. even until today, you know, scholars today don't really go back to Ibn Abi Aqil and Ibn al-Junayd to study, you know, their usul. It's kind of expired. It's outdated. Shaykh al-Tusi, we still refer to his books, even though many aspects of them have been outdated because we've built on them. We've built on them. And what's the name of his book, Shaykh al-Tusi? So as Sayyid al-Murtada, we mentioned what was the name of his book? Al-Dhari'ah. Shaykh al-Tusi, what's the name of his book? Al-Udda. His name, the name of the book is Al-Udda. So Shaykh al-Tusi, he really, you know, contributed to Ilm al-Usul, and he was extremely influential. Now let's mention a few important things here. The first one is about qiyas. We mentioned Ibn al-Junayd, Ibn Abi Aqil. Some of these scholars were accused of implementing qiyas. And qiyas is the trademark of Abu Hanifa. He's the one who really established it. First question, do you know what qiyas is? What does qiyas mean?
Just to guess, maybe applying a law of one field to another, like, and generalizing it.
So qiyas, that's very close. Qiyas is deductive analogy, where you take one law that applies to a case and you take it to another case by deductive analogy. You compare them and you say, you know, maybe they're similar, so let's give them the same ruling. And this would happen at the time of the Imams. Abu Hanifa was big on this. One hadith states Abu Hanifa with Ibn Abi Layla, who was one of the judges of the time employed by the state. They visit the Imam alayhi salam. The Imam talks about qiyas. He tells him qiyas is not valid. You should never compare. And let's give some examples to understand what qiyas is, because this is very important. One of the big differences between Shi'i usul and Sunni usul is that Sunni usul recognizes qiyas, especially the madhab of Abu Hanifa, whereas we reject the qiyas because we have tens and hundreds of narrations which prohibit us from implementing deductive analogy. So the Imam alayhi salam would give him, you know, several examples. Qiyas, deductive analogy. The Imam alayhi salam asked Abu Hanifa, he asked Ibn Abi Layla, he told him, which is a greater crime, a greater sin, to kill someone or to commit adultery? Which one is it? To kill or to commit adultery? Adultery is worse than slaughtering someone? According to our hadiths.
Okay.
This is not clear? Obviously, killing someone is a much bigger sin. Because you're killing, you're ending the life of someone. So unjustly killing someone, it's clear in the hadiths and in the Quran. You know, the Quran talks about slaying and killing. Yes, it talks about zina as well. It talks about adultery. But the sin of killing someone is much greater than the sin of zina.
Doesn't it come in the fitna?
Yes, it's a type of fitna. And the fitna is greater than, of course, killing someone. Because when you create a fitna, then many people can be deviated and many people can get killed. Fitna, like a big controversy, let's say. So, killing is obviously worse than committing adultery. It's a big sin. And when you see what, you know, how the Quran speaks about it, it speaks about it in a harsher tone than it does about zina. Now, the Imam alayhi salam asked them, he tells them, which is worse, killing or adultery? They both say, Abu Hanifa and Ibn Abi Layla, they say, no, of course, killing is worse. The Imam says, then why, according to Islamic law, to prove that someone killed someone, you need how many witnesses? 2. But to prove someone committed adultery such that they're punished, how many witnesses do you need? 4. So which is stricter, killing or adultery? When it comes to proving, to trying to prove someone who did this act, which one is stricter and more difficult? Adultery, because you need 4 witnesses, right? Whereas with killing, you need just 2 witnesses. But which one is a greater sin? Killing is a greater sin. So the Imam was telling him, see, you can't compare and do deductive analogy and say, oh, because killing is worse than adultery, than this or that. Because that's what Abu Hanifa would do. He would compare these laws. The Imam says, you can't do that. You take religion from God the way it is. Don't insert your own analogies and deductive analogy. You don't know the religion of God the way He's given it to us. So don't come up with your own opinions. A second example, the Imam a.s. asks him, Salah is more important or fasting? Which one? Salah is the pillar of faith. No Muslim will argue that, fasting is more important. Salah is more important. The Imam a.s. gives him this question. He says, when a woman is in her cycle, does she have to make up her salah for those prayers that she misses? No. Does she have to make up fasting?
Yes.
Why? I thought salah is more important. So something that is more important, you should make it up before something that is less important. So the Imam was teaching him, look, don't do deductive reasoning here, an analogy here. This is the religion of God. If I take your idea and your ideology and your thinking, then I should say that, you know what? Salah is where the woman needs to make it up and not the Sawm, not the fasting. So the Imam was teaching him, but of course he would reject.
Adultery.
And he told him that the first person who did qiyas was who? The first being who did qiyas was Iblis, Shaitan. When he said, I am better than Adam because fire is better than clay. See, he did an analogy, he compared. Let me give you a third example.
I have a question.
Yes.
Would it basically be haram for us to question in that way?
No, we can ask why. It's always allowed to ask the Imam or to ask a scholar why. But if you're giving a fatwa, can you do analogies and based on analogies give fatwa? No. But you can always ask why. I mean, you could go to the Imam and ask him, why does a woman need to make up fasting and not salah? It's okay to ask. But Abu Hanifa was not asking. He was issuing fatwas. People would follow him. Based on this analogy, based on qiyas. The Imam says you can't do qiyas in religion. You can't just compare things and issue your own fatwas. You have to have solid proof from the Quran, from the hadith of the Prophet for you to issue a fatwa. Not your own analogies. The Imam a.s., there's another interesting example. Many people have an issue in accepting this example, but we'll mention this. Aban, one of the companions of Imam al-Sadiq a.s., he comes and he tells him, we've heard that you, the Imam, would say, in Islamic law, if you physically hurt someone, you have to give them what is called a diya. What is the diya? If you kill someone, you have to give them blood money. The diya is called blood money. You have to give them some sort of financial compensation. Many parents, they don't abide by this. Sometimes they'll hit their children and they injure them, blood comes out, or the skin blackens. You have to give your child a diya. Yes. You have to give them financial compensation. Aside from asking Allah's forgiveness, you have to give them financial compensation. So now, in Islamic law, if you cut someone's finger, you have to give diya. If you cut one finger, you have to give what's equivalent to 10 camels. So what is the price of 10 camels? Remember, back then people would deal with camels. What's the price of 10 camels? $10,000? You have to compensate that person $10,000. Or that person can do qisas, can seek revenge or retribution. if you unjustly and deliberately cut somebody's finger, in Islamic law, they've got two options. Either to cut your finger, that's retribution, or to forgive you and take the compensation, or just to forgive you altogether. So what's the diya for cutting somebody's finger? One finger, 10 camels, or the price of 10 camels. Two fingers, 20. 3, 30. 4, 10 fingers, how many? 100, the full diya. Now Aban, he comes to the Imam alayhi salam, and he tells him, we've heard that you've said, if you cut the finger of a woman, of a female, if you cut one finger, 10 camels, just like a man. Two fingers, 2 camels, just like a man. 3, what did I say? 20. So one finger, 10 camels. Two fingers, 20 camels. 3 fingers, how many? 30 camels. But if you cut 4 fingers, it goes down to 20. He said, when we heard this, we thought Shaitan is teaching people this. Because if you cut 3 fingers, you have to give 30. But if you cut an additional one, it goes down to 20. So he's like, we rejected it. We're like, no, Imam Sadiq didn't say this. The Imam alayhi salam becomes disappointed in him. And he tells him, أَخَذْتَنِي بِالْقِيَاسِ. You're using deductive analogy here by comparing the numbers. He's like, I'll tell you the religion of God. In Islamic law, the diya of a female is how much compared to that of a male? Half. Now there's a reason for that. It's not discrimination, it's not being anti-woman. The primary reason, of course Allah knows the real reason, but the primary reason is that especially back then, even until today, but especially back then, who was the breadwinner for a family? The financial responsibility was primarily on who? The man. So if you kill a man, you have to give the diya, the blood money, right? When a man is killed, the financial loss of that family is bigger than the financial loss when a woman is killed. See, if a father is killed, how does the family support itself? The financial loss is bigger. Whereas if a mother is killed, the emotional loss is bigger. Maybe the psychological loss is bigger, right? But not the financial loss, because the father is still there and he can support the family. So that's why Islam said when a man dies, give more blood money to compensate the family, because now they've lost their breadwinner, right? This is the main philosophy. In Islamic law, the blood money, the diya, the compensation money of a woman is half that of a man. However, up to 1/3 of the diya, the woman shares the man. So it's like a plus that God is giving for the woman. That up to 1/3, you share the man. Your diya is just like that of a man. So the diya is 10. We have 10 fingers, right? So you have 10 fingers. The first finger, the man is 10 camels. So originally the woman should be how many camels? Originally 5. But because God says the first third, you, the woman, will give you an extra, so you share the man the same blood money, it becomes 10. So originally it's how much? It's 5, but we give more. The second is 20% now. The second finger is 20% of the total fingers. So she's still under that third. The third finger is still 30%. It's under the third, 33%, right? So she still has 30 camels. When you now cut 4 fingers, you've cut how much? 40%. 40% is more than 1/3 or no? No. It's more than 1/3. So what's the default state of the blood money of a woman? Half. And half of 40 is what? 20. So it goes to its default state. It's just like, without really, comparing the two, it's like when you go to a supermarket and they tell you, look, if you buy this item, we'll give it to you for $100. If you buy the second one, you get it for half off. If you buy the third one, you'll get all three for 30%. And there's a discount. But if you buy 5 or more, we're not going to give you any discount. A store could do that, right? Theoretically, he could do something like that. So the Imam ﷺ tells him, oh Aban, you did qiyas, you did deductive analogy. You said, okay, if one finger 10, 2, 20, 3, 30, then 4 must be 40. But that's not how the religion of Allah works. There's another reason involved here. Now Abu Hanifa and these others, they wouldn't accept this. They would use deductive analogy. Even if sometimes there was a hadith from the Prophet, it didn't go with their deductive analogy, they would reject it. They would give their own fatwa. These are some examples of qiyas. Deductive analogy. And the Hanafi school of thought is heavily based on qiyas. We, the Ahlul Bayt school of thought, we reject qiyas. So is that clear? Now, Ibn Abi Aqil and Ibn al-Junayd, there are some legal rulings in their books which appear to be using qiyas. Which appear to be. So that's why some of the scholars at their time, they attacked them. They told them, look, you're using qiyas and you're influenced by the Sunni schools of thought. Otherwise, Ibn Abi Aqil, he was, a Shia scholar, and he's got many contributions, and he really developed the science of Usul. Now, maybe there were some aspects of his legal works where you could say there were some traces of qiyas. And those literalist scholars, they had a big, big problem with that. But in the end, he's widely respected, and he's been credited to develop the science of Usul. So you see that in this chapter, really, the author is talking about this history of development. And we talk about Shaykh al-Tusi and how important his works were. And Shaykh al-Tusi in his book, when the Shia scholars would be attacked by the Sunnis, they would tell the Shias, look, you Shias don't have qiyas, so your fiqh is very weak. You just have hadiths and you don't use any deductive reasoning, any logic. Shaykh al-Tusi in his book, he refutes that. He says, no, we Shia, we don't have qiyas, but we have usul. And this is our usul. And he really gives an amazing image to the Shia school of thought. How concise it was, how powerful it was, how reasonable it was, but at the same time we don't have to use qiyas, which the Prophet and the Imams did not allow us to use. So I don't have to use qiyas for me to have a deep legal school of thought. I have a deep legal school of thought, yet I don't use qiyas. So as Shaykh al-Tusi, he really was instrumental in giving us that image and in dispelling many of those misconceptions. Now, after Shaykh al-Tusi, and we end with these few words. After Shaykh al-Tusi, if you go to page 36, you see under the heading, the period of stagnation. Shaykh al-Tusi was a towering figure in Islamic law and in Usul. He was so powerful that for nearly 100 years, the scholars would do taqleed of him. They would follow his views. No scholar had the audacity, the courage to come and refute some of his views, to critically assess them. Most scholars would come and they would just accept what he would say. It's like, for example, towering figures like Newton or Einstein. You needed many, many decades later for scientists to come and change some aspects of their theories, right? For many decades, people just followed them. Their theories were set in stone. Al-Shaykh al-Tusi was so powerful, such a towering figure, that for nearly 100 years, most seminaries just followed his views. There was no new ijtihad. So that's why the author calls this the period of stagnation. Because in that century, there was little development in Islamic law, in usul, in legal theories. And we have Ibn Idris al-Hilli. Al-Shaykh al-Tusi passed away in 460, so the middle of the 5th century. Ibn Idris al-Hilli passed away in the year 598. So we're talking about a century and a half after Shaykh al-Tusi. Ibn Idris al-Hilli was the scholar who stood up and he challenged the views of Shaykh al-Tusi. And he reopened the door to ijtihad, and he accelerated the path of ijtihad, and he deepened the Islamic legal theory. So after Shaykh al-Tusi, who broke that stagnation? And he was able to successfully challenge the views of Shaykh al-Tusi. His name was Ibn Idris al-Hilli. And what's his famous work? You'll find it in the text, the author talks about it. His famous work was As-Sara'ir. The book of As-Sara'ir by Ibn Idris al-Hilli. He was very, very instrumental in that. But then, after this era, we see the Sunni Usul die down with the new controversies, because the Sunni scholars, historically, they were employed by who? The state. So if the state is stable, if the political climate is stable, then the scholars are producing. But then we had a period of political crisis, especially when the Mughals, they attacked the Muslim world. We talked about that in the first course, and how scholars were now influenced by philosophies, new ideas entering, and we see Sunni scholars shifting away from legal theory and focusing on other philosophies. That's when Sunni Usul pretty much dies out. And Shia Usul, it accelerates. It keeps accelerating until you reach the time of Al-Allam al-Hilli. When you hear Al-Hilli, this is Allam al-Hilli, not Ibn Idris al-Hilli. He's not that famous. Al-Allam al-Hilli is the one who took ilm al-usul, legal theory, to just a new different dimension. He just gave new dimensions to this science. So really, these are the big names in legal theory. I've summarized many of these points, so we can start, by examining ilm al-usul. And this was just a brief history for us to know how we got the science, how it developed, and how it evolved. And today, in the seminaries, I would say probably the biggest field that we have right now, and the most complicated, is ilm al-usul. If Al-Allam al-Hilli sees our usul today, I think he would be shocked at how it expanded and how deep it has become.
I would say that's because of the change in the environment and the things that have been invented and everything that has come, like science has...
See, the changes in the environment definitely played a role. But remember, you have this accumulation of knowledge throughout history. So you have these genius scholars who come, they open new windows that previous scholars would not see. New discoveries, new angles, new dimensions. And they would build on that. So it's just like medicine, biology, chemistry. You get a big scientist who just opens a new path. Al-Tusi did that. Ibn Idris al-Hilli did that. Al-Allam al-Hilli, they just opened new dimensions. They made discoveries. And then, the scholars, they accepted many of those discoveries, and that's how we expanded ilm al-usul. So it's very interesting when you see this historical development. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.